Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today with Mette, my old friend Mette from many days beforehand, especially in Denmark, and who's now at the director of the Center for Systems Awareness, and also working at MIT as well. And then here we have Michael Dunn, who is working on a bio book, which I'm helping him a little bit with, and another guy named John McGaugh. And so we're going to take a little dive today into systems thinking. These are some of the books I worked on early on that, and its relevance to what's going on today. Great to have you both here.
Thank you, John. Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I love being in Crestone, and I always really appreciate whenever I have the opportunity to come here. As you know, I first heard about you when I read the book Presence, and there was this description of somebody going on retreat with you, and it was a kind of a nature-based retreat. And at that time, of course, I had my teacher and my Sangha in Denmark, which is kind of a Dzogchen-based lineage.
What is Dzogchen?
What is Dzogchen? It's, as far as I understand, it's the most challenging form of Buddhist practice, because the idea is that you don't have to do anything. So my teacher was a student of Urgyen Tulku Rinpoche, and you've met him, Jes Bertelsen. You've met him several times, and so there's a lovely blend there. But the nature-based connection really resonated very deeply with me. Not only am I a biologist myself, but also have this, and have always had this kind of deep connection to the other living beings. And so when I read that book, I understood two things. One was I had to go and find you, and the other was that I had to go and find Peter Senge. And so I tracked down Peter, and we started working together pretty quickly, and then he introduced me to you. And I came directly from Bhutan the first time I came here, and I was delayed I had to fly out of Kathmandu to get here over China. It was a crazy ride, and I was I was really wanting to come. And so I ended up driving the whole night. I slept in the car for a couple of hours somewhere on Kappa Mountain. It was in October. It was pretty cold, but I arrived, and I didn't know where your house was, because I didn't have an address. So I had to figure out how to get to your place, and I eventually really actually got there, and you weren't there. So I fell asleep in the car again, and the first thing you saw was my kind of foot sticking out the window, I think. And after that kind of crazy adventure, coming from Bhutan, being delayed in Nepal, coming here, and so on, it was just an intense journey, an intense trip. And you looked at me and you were like, "You need apple juice." That was the first thing you said to me. And I was like, okay, I need apple juice. And I had a cup of apple juice. And then we went out here. And I was very skeptical at that point. I was really not sure why I had taken this crazy trip halfway across the world with, such a willful effort to actually get here. And all the wild dynamics that it took to get here. And then you asked me to sit on a rock. And I kind of knew that was why I was here. And at the same time, my kind of skeptical scientist was just, what am I doing here again? And so I sat down on a stone seat, and it was like a really intense and profound kind of pointing out. And that happened kind of instantaneously. It was a cluster of 3 seats. Down here, one of them was a kind of a heart seat, a reclining heart seat, and the two, you didn't take me to the dolphin or any of the kind of, traditional seats that you usually take people to. It was 3 seats over here.
A little further down.
Yeah, a little further down. And then you took me around on the lands. and showed me seeds. And I was, after that initial kind of opening, it was
Now,
pretty
for
clear.
a lot of the folks watching this on YouTube,
Yeah.
they probably don't, they're wondering what exactly is a stone seed.
Well, maybe you should explain that.
Oh, okay. I'm on the spot. These are ancient seats that appear, most of them have been made a long time ago. Some cases probably thousands of years. And when you sit in them, there's a field shift that you enter into. And your body and the seat begin to resonate together. And that opens up deep insights and the kind of inner knowingness that is quite unique. And this place here has one of the biggest concentrations of these seats anywhere in the world. Western Colorado. We call this place where we're videoing right now with the help of Brad and Priya. It's called the Sacred Land Sanctuary. And it's one of the first examples of setting aside nature as sacred, as the temple of the church. And these seats are protected within the sanctuary. So the sanctuary holds this amazing configuration of energy currents across the earth. And the seats that, often the seats are where they cross two energy currents. And just like we have acupuncture meridians, so does the earth. These seats are often at the cross points. So it amps it up a bit.
See, that was all the things you told me that made me skeptical before
Yes.
I came out and sat on one. And you know, as most things, you can be as skeptical as you like, and your mind can intrigue you to not believe in things. But then, at least in my understanding, if I'm a good scientist, I have to also allow myself being open to the experience.
Yeah.
And I've really benefited from that here in such tremendous and deep ways that I can't even begin to explain.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun here and also in Denmark.
Yeah.
And your daughter and son did a month-long solo here.
They did. So I kept coming for a while, and then my daughter came with me on one trip, and you met the kids when you did the retreats, when we did the retreats in Denmark at Låns. We did those 2 times. And then they came here for your all one time, 28-day solo. And it must have been about 8 years ago now, because Gus, my son...
They were pretty young then.
Yeah, he turned 21. So in the middle of the retreat, he turned 21, and it was on a new moon, and that was when he did his vision quest in the retreat.
In the middle of the retreat.
Yeah, it was a life-altering experience for both of them. And one of the things that I feel, you know, being a parent, reflecting on your now adult children and how they've turned out, I'm very, very proud of them. And I also am painfully awake to all the ways in which I could have been a much better parent, but gifting them this
And
has
your son
been...
is now working with Peter.
Yeah, he does. He's been working with us since we started since we formed the center.
And the center as well.
Yeah, he leads our youth leadership team
Oh,
at the
great,
Center for Systems Awareness. So
I didn't know that.
originally, when we started shaping the framework, we wanted young people involved, so it didn't become yet another kind of tokenistic, youth voice tokenistic experience. So I was like, I grabbed Gus, who was at that time 17, and brought him to MIT. It was like, I have a youngling, let's bring him in. And it resonated very deeply with him. Both of my kids have also been in the teachings with Jes Bertelsen since they were very young. So they both also have a contemplative practice. And so Gus took on his own journey with all this and shaped with a bunch of other young folks, the youth leadership team that works globally with young people from more than 100 countries in the world, giving them this training and helping them. You know, they have a very popular process called Climate Change and Me, or Compassionate Climate Program, where They work with, the simulators and the kind of understanding climate change, the complexity and the systems perspectives, but also working with the inner aspects. So what do I do with all the emotions when they become overwhelming, and how can I collaborate better with people and so on? It's very powerful and lovely work, yeah. And he and Peter are working closely together in different kind of pockets.
Wonderful. So I was involved in helping get the Academy for Systems Change going with Peter and Darcy Winslow and a number of other people.
Yeah.
And you've had some connection to that group as well. But what is the Center for Systems Awareness, and how is that different than what the Academy was doing? And what's the relevance of a systems perspective in this time?
Well, I can't say that I know too much about what the Academy was actually doing, because I was never directly involved. One of the things that has been pretty clear to me from the beginning when I started working with Peter was a very strong emphasis on the contemplative work, because it's pretty clear. I know most people who kind of sell systems change, if you will, they have little kind of boxes you can tick, and then here's how 7 steps to systems change. And sometimes I'm like, have you ever met people? Do you think that if they don't change, the systems are going to change? And people don't just change. So the whole kind of the whole process of what it actually takes for people to begin to experience the motivation and the intrinsic kind of stance that it is inherently involved in anything that becomes an actual change process, a transformational process, in my view, can only come through a deep commitment to a contemplative practice. That level of kind of cleaning up inwardly is essential for any systems change.
Yeah.
And I think I was very adamant about that, which is not for everyone. And it also makes it a lot more complicated. It's not an easy sell. And it's harder for people to understand why if they haven't tried it themselves and so on. But on the other hand, now, 12 years later, it's pretty clear that it works really well when people take on that kind of contemplative practice as part of their systems change efforts.
How does the contemplative practice integrate with the systems understanding and awareness?
Well, that's the whole essence of systems awareness, if you will.
Just for the benefit of our viewers.
I think, so when I teach this, I usually explain it in a pretty kind of, I can do that. I have a little spiel about it. So we've all been, in our educational settings, we've all been trained in linear thinking, right? It's very practical. It's a byproduct, if you will, of the kind of internalized capitalist mental model of A plus B equals C, and there's the right answer, and you can always kind of make sure that you can quantify things, and that's why you can give grades and so on and so forth. So that's how we've all been conditioned through our education systems. That's the metaphor of going to the woods and being able to see one tree at a time. Systems thinking, of course, has grown tremendously over the last couple of decades in a variety of disciplines for all kinds of good reasons. Systems thinking is allowing us to understand that nonlinear processes are possible, and that there are interdependencies and delays in the system, and ways in which things are intrinsically connected. So it's the metaphor of you go to the woods and you understand that it's not just the single individual trees, but it's also how the system itself, the ecosystem, is in connection and interdependencies and in relationship, which is really great and has benefited tremendously to our much more kind of organic understanding of, living systems dynamic, if you will. However, it still has us as an observer of the system. So systems awareness is a pretty diligent process of cultivating the literacy of understanding something about what it does to me entering into the system. Mm-hmm. So what's the experiences that are, if we use the metaphor of the woods, when I go into the woods, what are the scents? If the rain has just been falling, on a summer's day, and the earth has this particular scent that it gives off, or the sunshine coming down through the leaves, or what does it do to my nervous system to be immersed in all the greenery?
How does it smell around here?
it's wonderful. There's a very particular crestone scent to the whole thing, and of course the air here is really dry, so it also are.
And very pure, very clear.
It's very pure and very dry, and has a very distinct flavor to it. Yeah. But that we've been systematically taught that is not relevant information for us to take into account what it does to us entering into the system. How the other species are responding to us. I spend a lot of time sitting under trees meditating, and when I'm quiet enough, using a lot of what I've learned from you. How am I in relationship with this tree, and allowing myself to actually experience that. So that's what systems awareness does. In my view, and I'm super biased, but in my view, all of the massive challenges that we're looking at in the world of today, all the massive challenges that you were laying out decades ago, would have not gotten to this point if we had had systems awareness. If we had allowed ourselves to experience what it actually does to us.
If that was built into our educational systems.
If we had allowed to really experience what it does to us when we stand in LA on a day full of moisture in the air, and in rush hour traffic, and breathe the air. If we really experience what that's like, we would have probably done something about this way, way, way sooner. So in my view, this is a way in which at least we can point to that there is a lacking literacy that we can grow and develop, and that's what we've been working on for these many years.
Beautiful. Yeah. So Michael, this might be of interest to you, the work you're doing.
Yeah, the central gift that we are seeing that the book Lightning Shaman on John's life and work can give is...
Which book is that?
Lightning Shaman.
What book is that?
Okay. Well, that is a book that will soon be published, probably sometime in early 2027, on the life and work of John P. Milton, specifically, the development of way of nature, covering the whole spectrum of his work as a scientist, an activist, as a mystic, as a teacher.
As a spiritual Indiana
Jones. I have my background in story work in the entertainment industry. They have the elevator pitch. Oh, what's your project about? A 30-second elevator pitch. Okay, so it's Indiana Jones meets Henry David Thoreau meets the Dalai Lama. Just work with those three, if you can imagine. And it's actually the truth. So in listening to what you were just sharing, specifically about the necessity of a contemplative practice for systems change to actually take effect. When we think about the power and impact of the sacred passage, of properly guided introduction to the practices that can make a sacred passage deep and powerful. The 11 directions, the 12 principles, the 6 empowerments, all of the things that John has brought together by his deep practice in all these different sacred traditions. In your experience, both as a systems change leader and teacher, and having done sacred passages on the land, having a contemplative practice, realizing that's an essential part of systems change. What's your experience of how the sacred passage particularly, can that be potentially, a high-impact, sustainable experience that could open people's eyes to not just the necessity of a contemplative practice, but the desire for it? I know from my own background in the theater, it took me years to get over my laziness and kick my butt to actually begin. Even though I intensely desired a contemplative practice, it took me a lot of years to actually do it. So that's a kind of a long-winded question, but can you share on that?
Yeah, so first off, just to kind of make that clear, I don't think that there is a kind of a shortcut. I don't believe in instant enlightenment. If that was the case, we would have probably seen it a little more widespread in the world. I have had the pleasure of spending time with people, a lot of time with people in my sangha and others who kind of have dedicated their lives to meditation. And I know it's very hard work. And for most people, it does not kind of automatically result in enlightenment or even steps towards enlightenment and so on. So all of that, just to say that's a kind of I think that's a different process. However, what I have seen with people coming out of John's retreat is an immediate awakening to reconnecting with nature, which I think is a fundamental principle of that is often underestimated or undervalued in a lot of contemplative trainings. And I think that's a fundamental principle for that intrinsic motivation to be able to grow. I think if people, let's say, if in a kind of an ideal scenario, if this was something that was kind of a part of, if you will, an educational setting, or this was a sacred passage was part of kind of rites of passage in our cultures in general, I think it would be much easier for people to then work with the tools and strategy like in our framework to immediately begin to shift things. I think when people come here, and this is like something they do maybe 2 times in their lives, and they might have that awakening to nature and discover, oh my God, I belong, I'm part of this. But then they go back into their everyday lives, and it's super busy, and there's binging and dinging everywhere, and they're sucked back into the habitual fields that they operate within. This becomes a nice to have, and maybe something that they can revisit privately, but not something that's a catalyst for change. And that's not because of this retreat or this program or lack of teaching or anything like that. That's something to do with the gap of structure, if you will. If we look at what most westernized modern people, how they live their lives, we give away our awareness and attention for free to a few guys who make insane amounts of money on it and consistently it feed us where we're supposed to put our attention instead of turning it inwardly and allowing ourselves to remember that we belong here, right? So and grounding into the planet. So it's a long-term process. The good news is, in my view at least, what we see over and over again is when people discover it, it makes them feel so much better. I'll give you an example. In this youth leadership team that we work with, recently we have global calls for our global community, and it was a youth-led global call. So I was in a breakout group with a young guy from Indonesia. He had no idea who I was. I was just some old lady that he was guiding a meditation for, which of course was a really fun experience for me. So he was guiding a loving kindness practice.
Old lady?
He was 15. I'm sure I looked like an old lady to him. Thank you. And he was guiding this loving kindness practice. And I got to ask him questions about it after. So first of all, he started asking us questions. So how did it work for you? Is this something you regularly engage in? I was like, sometimes. And then I asked him, he said, well, I was 14 when I took this on. And I discovered one thing very quickly. I discovered that when I really cultivate my intentions for doing well for others, it makes me feel so much better. And I'm like, if a young guy can experience that just so by going through our youth leadership training, and that becomes kind of a guiding post for him, then why are we not trying to do that for all young people so that they discover that when we do good by others, it actually makes us feel better when we're looking at how the mental health and well-being is declining everywhere in the world and so on. So what I'm trying to say is it doesn't have to be, enormous and humongous change, but it has to be very intentional. And that level of intentionality requires focus and attention and awareness. And right now, most of our focus and attention and awareness is scattered more than it's probably ever been before. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there in that realm, if you will. Yeah.
I think we had I came up a few years ago with an insight that most retreats, as you were saying, you have a wonderful experience. It's very meaningful. Maybe some interchanges occur. Then you go back home and you're surrounded by the behavior and culture that pulls you away from everything that you had received.
Structural forces at play. You're getting sucked right back in.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
So a few years ago, I decided we needed to design the sacred passage to actually emphasize re-entry into the regular world and to have the emphasis on how do you integrate what you've received in your training and in your period of solitude with nature. And I came up with this idea of tempering, where you go back and forth, maybe go into town, come back, connect where you had a deep opening of insight, back to town, go back to the place where the insight opened, and notice where the blockages and the obscurations arise internally in yourself that shut down the opening of the insight, the flowering of the insight in regular life. And so they begin to learn that, especially through finding that they can be fully present and deeply relaxed, even when in the context of a crazy outside world, or back into a workplace or a family situation that would be stressful.
Yeah.
They actually have the option to relax and be fully present. And over time they trust that. They can go deeper and deeper with the tempering approach until finally it doesn't matter whether they're out here and we're back home.
I love that approach, and as you may remember, John, you told me that my process was one of constant tempering because I was constantly kind of coming in and out and moving between all these places because I travel as much as I do.
And we've been working together how many years?
12, I think.
12?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that an auspicious number? And after 12 years, you're now ready to meet the teacher in a new way and stuff?
I think...
is that what's happening?
Something is happening.
Something is going on? Yeah. It feels that way to me as well. And I've really taken that tempering approach. It's been very, very valuable because I rarely have time to do a longer retreat any longer because I'm so occupied with doing all the stuff out there. So for me to be able to dive in here for a couple of days, a couple of times a year, and really be here and then take it with me out has been enormously supportive. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. Great. One of the things that has been really very satisfying for me is to see that in many of the traditional disciplines, they came about during a time when there's less danger to the overall global environment. So they didn't have a lot of stress on working with nature as a partner, much less developing a concern for nature as part of your family. Having that family relationship where you're going to do those things to protect your family, make sure it's healthy. That is a goal now for the way of nature. And when we began to see that gap in many of the traditional cultural traditions, we began to design a training process which had a multicultural language. It was not the language of a particular religion or a particular spiritual pathway or a particular scientific perspective. We've kind of integrated especially ecology, especially ecosystem ecology, which was my background, and the essence of many of the world's great traditions that provided connection to the world and also to Source itself. And so it's been really inspiring, especially you've been working with a wonderful teacher in Denmark, yes, and Dzogchen, which is really, it's a pathless view. You drop all the pointers. The pointing out is good, pointing out of Source, but then you immediately drop it. And eventually you drop the drop.
Perhaps in a few lifetimes.
Yes.
But yes, it's been I think if I hadn't had the many years of training with Yis before I came here, it probably wouldn't have opened up in quite the same way. But as I have shared with you ever so often, John, I never knew how to relax before I came here, and you taught me. And I see what Yis, in my personal experience, the teachings from Yis, which are very clear, are vertical. They're like, you know, speaking to the higher beings, if you will, or that's the connection. And here, I've always had the experience that when I'm on the Sacred Land Sanctuary, I'm literally moving in your extended consciousness. It's much, much more field-based. And that part of it, I was missing that in the Dzogchen approach, at least as it was taught to me, because that kind of field experience is more attuned to how my own kind of practice unfolds as well. My work is out there with people, not sitting isolated and going higher. And I think that it has become I use a lot of this, of course, that I've learned here in my work also now. As I share it with you, we have systems awareness retreats. And I did one recently last month up in the Nisga'a Nation in British Columbia.
It's a Native American group, right?
It is. It's a First Nations people in British Columbia. One of the ones they live in a very remote place. Because it's so remote, their lands were never taken, so they've lived there for 15,000 years. And it's an extraordinary partnership. I'm so honored and humbled to be able to work with the lovely humans and the lovely spirits and the nature there. It is the density of energy in the space there is higher. I ask people to kind of, when you move your hands, can you feel that it's more alive than it is in most places? And I think that comes from having so many years of direct relationship to the lands. And then, of course, disrupted for the last 150 years of colonization. But what we're doing now is we're working with a lot of the elders and the knowledge keepers to kind of help people reconnecting to nature.
Beautiful.
And people come from different places in the world, all over British Columbia, to participate in that, which is just beautiful. The first time I did it last year, when we end off with the 11 Directions ceremony in a pretty sacred space down by the river, and we had eagles. And this year, when we ended off with the 11 Directions ceremony, we had ravens everywhere.
Oh, beautiful.
So that felt pretty auspicious.
Yeah.
And people are like, our ancestors are here.
Yeah.
Last year, we also had a snake trying to come into the room where we were.
Oh,
and
great.
it was just like, there was a lot going on in that way.
Yeah.
So it is, it's a gift.
Yeah.
And I would have never been able to do any of that if I hadn't had all this time with you and the incredible gift of your teachings, John.
It sounds like it's flowering in a really beautiful context.
It is. Yeah.
Love to meet those folks sometime.
Why don't we do a retreat here, and I'll bring
Yeah.
some of them.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be great.
That was what
Kane.
yeah. Let's talk about this.
She's been sitting in a seat we have here, which is in the shape of a dolphin. And as you would expect when you sit with this, place your hands on the dolphin, and then there's that beautiful pink round stone that you sit on, and then place your hands on this white dolphin, grayish white dolphin, and the playfulness and loving kindness that arises naturally from that smile. It's incredible. So I'm delighted you had a little time with the dolphin and with the seat we call the source seat.
I'd love to ask you a question about when we're working on the book and interweaving the wonderful stories from John's life and experience with the principles and with the system change angle that we're focusing in on. It's a uniquely powerful blend in John's life and work for a popularly accessible, moving, exciting, astonishing adventure, really, that also embodies the absolute necessity for a restoration of this lost initiation, our connection to nature. Just in terms of the impact of storytelling in systems change, if you have anything you want to say about that.
Yeah. I always go back to Joseph Campbell, who, the great mythologist, of course, and he talked about how we haven't yet found the myth that can bring people into understanding or bringing them together. And I do think that your life has a lot of material that would be relevant for that, John. And I also think that when most people are confronted with your life, at least I'll say for myself, my first thought is always, I wonder how many lives he's actually referring to, because I don't think I've ever met anyone who's accomplished or had that broad a range of experiences, and it's always kind of coming as a kind of a side sentence. Yes, this was when I was preserving tigers in Nepal, or oh, that reminds me of the time on the Nile when I almost was shot, or stuff like that, as a kind of just a little side sentence somewhere. And it's a wild journey that you've been on. I do think that it's really important that people come to understand more about your life and your life's work. I talk about you frequently, and I can see that it really resonates with people. For me, it's always been really helpful that this is not part of a particular religion or part of you don't have to kind of buy into any kind of dogma. You can be whomever you are, but it's basically just processes of learning how to reconnect to nature. So I think what you're asking, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's what is the story that can help bringing people together. And I think we're all looking for that, and hopefully we can all make contributions to that in various ways. I think your story is an important one for people to understand that this is possible. And your life, as extraordinary as it is and has been, but how it's been influencing so many people, how you've helped so many people of finding their own kind of place in the world, I think is probably as entertaining and exciting as your story is. The story of how that spreads to other people and help them reconnecting to nature is what I think is something that there is a deep longing for. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know, I wish I knew what the recipe was, because I do think that is, I thought for a long time, I'm sure we've probably shared this, that if we only had the scientific understanding, of course things would change. That was the naive hope of a scientist. And then I realized, as I got further and further in my studies, we actually know everything we need to know in order to change. And then I was like, okay, so if all this information becomes accessible to people, then things will change. Everything in the world is accessible to pretty much everyone in the world. And what do? We kind of binge watch Netflix and watch reels, so we don't have to focus on anything. So it's not as if that has been particularly helpful either. It's a significantly different style of draw, a pull for people that is needed.
Getting back to the sacred passage and the power of storytelling, one of the things that I don't think we've discussed this very much, John, but that we want to include in the book are the stories of the people whose lives have been transformed by sacred passage. I mean, I've only experienced one myself in Baja a couple of years ago, but it certainly afterwards my life changed powerfully, simply because of the impact of being, well, let's see, inner nature, outer nature, true nature. How far did I get in that process? Far enough to reawaken to what I felt was my sole purpose. And so to include in the book not only the arc of John's amazing life and how the sacred passage as a gift to humanity of the lost initiation to our connectedness with nature, but also how it has affected individual lives and the accounts of various people. That this brings it down from the level of the mythic and heroic, which is enormously powerful and useful, to the level of the thousands of people. Some of them thought leaders and systems change people like yourself and Peter Senge, and a lot of people in all kinds of countries and walks of life. So we hope to blend the two. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of my students was a cab driver and also sold used cars. And he came to Baja and did a passage. And his partner, his buddy, was another man who, they both came out, and the cab driver shared an incredibly powerful transformative experience where he had a vision of a gigantic rattlesnake coming in, coiling around him, and then him standing in the middle of the coils with the rattlesnake in its open mouth, and the rattlesnake was transmitting an incredibly strong energy that connected him to everything that he was surrounded by in the desert, the cacti, the flowers, the ocean, everything. And so when he came back, he said, "John, you're not going to believe how powerfully I had a vision which completely changed my life." And the other guy said, "Well, nothing happened for me. Nothing. No change." And I said, "What did you do with your time there?" He said, "Well, I did bring in a book of a Russian novel. It's one of the famous Russian novels.
Right, War and Peace, I think.
It was something like that."
Yeah.
He said, "So I read War and Peace with all my spare time. But nothing happened." The cab driver, used car salesman, went on to go deeper and deeper into the process. And some 6 or 7 years later, I was giving a talk in Seattle. A guy raised his hand in the back of the room, and it was this guy. I hadn't seen him for maybe 3 or 4 years. And he shared with the group there about not just the life-transforming thing that happened at that time, but then how that continued to go on and on and on, and open into a relationship with nature, inner nature, outer nature, and true nature. That completely changed everything in his life, who he was married to, where he lived, and everything he was doing in the world. He went on to he actually became #1 salesman in Tucson. And then from there he leapfrogged into helping others transform. And being a good salesman, he could kind of help and train them, bring them in. But I love that story.
It is. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And I think, as we've often talked about, John, there's so many things. You come as a background as an ecologist. I'm an ethologist, so I've studied complex systems, evolution of complex systems, social systems, animal behavior, and then human behavior. And I've had so many encounters here in Crestone, but also in many other places when I've allowed myself to be open to nature in this particular way, that if people were describing them to me, I would not believe them. And one of the first things that happened when I was here was we walked around. I was on the first visit, very first time I came. We walked around, you showed me various places. And then at one point you came by a place where you were like, "Oh, I haven't seen this for a while. I'm going to take a nap." And I meandered around a little bit and so on. And then we continued. And we came down. It was way down in rock heaven, stone heaven, and I was really drawn to a seat. And you looked at it, you were like, "Oh, that didn't used to be here." And I sat down, and it was a very kind of, because I've been focused on this understanding generative social fields or social fields my whole life. That's been my kind of journey. And I had this profound kind of experience of the field as I was sitting on that rock. And I picked up, one of the flowers that had fallen off the tree and carried that around. And we meandered around for another 2 hours or so until I realized that I had lost my phone. And we've been walking around in this sanctuary full of rocks for, 4 or 5 hours already. And I had no idea where my phone was. And you found another seat where we were like, "Oh, I'm having another nap." And I was like, "Okay, great. I'm going to go find my phone. How am I finding my phone?" And you had taught me about, look for the signs. And I was like, "Okay, spirits of the lands here, I've never talked to you before. I don't know how to do this, but can you please guide me to my phone?" And somehow I was drawn back to that particular seat, far away from where you were, which was wild. And my phone was lying right next to the seat, and your business card was on top of that phone. I didn't have your business card, so I don't know how that ended up there. And so my phone was here, and the flower that I had picked up, there was an identical flower lying right next to the seat. Beautiful. So it was like a glitch in the matrix coming back into the space. It was quite wild. And I was like, okay, something's clearly going on here. Not only did I manage to find out of how 5 gazillion rocks down there, I found the one that I had just been, sitting at a couple of hours earlier. No idea how it happened to this day. And then I sat down again, and I was in awe of all these things coming together, the neatly placed phone with the neatly placed business card and the identical flower, just so I wasn't kind of mistaking anything and all of that. And as I sat down, it was a kind of a circular space, and there was knocking on all the trees all around. Not kind of wild or anything, but just duk, 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 duk all around. And it was a teaching moment of what I've been studying my whole life that was probably more profound than any other one moment that I've had around this kind of the understanding of social fields. And I was, naked is not the right word, but I was kind of dressed to the bone, if you will, because everything that I've been trained to believe, every way I've been trained to think, and I went to school most of my life, right? Everything was stripped away, and here I was with this teaching that I could either, take it or leave it. And after that, I was sucked in, if you will. Yeah.
Natural magic.
Yeah.
Life is a magical event.
It becomes a little more obvious here often. Yeah. Well, okay, so I came back probably, a couple of months later. It was during the winter. And I was looking for that seat again. I felt I have to go back to that seat. And it kept it was very hard for me to find it. Sometime it would show up immediately. I would just stop the car by the road, walk in, and go right to the seat. And sometimes I couldn't find it at all. One time, one of the days while I was here, I couldn't find it. I was like, I'm walking the exact same path. I've marked it. I know where I am, but the seat is not there. And then I couldn't find it, but then I looked, and there was a coyote skull hanging on a branch, pointing the direction. And I went, and there was the seat. And it should be said that I had quite a few encounters with coyotes here. So while sitting at that seat, on that second visit, I kept seeing stuff in the shrubs, and I drew them for you. And one was a thunderbird, which I didn't know existed as a kind of a symbol. One was another kind of weird little figure that you then told me was a kind of a classical drawing of a particular mischievous demon-like character in the local traditions here. It's like images I didn't know in advance that kind of came out. And I was so distorted after all of that I went out, and the coyote was standing in front of my car. And I was like, you're probably not supposed to stand in the middle of the road. And then I kind of started driving, and the coyote stayed in front of the car from all the way down here. And I tried to pass it kind of slowly, and it moved over and stayed with me. And then I was like driving, and I was probably not really fit for driving at that time because it had been so wild. So I was driving carefully after the coyote, not knowing what to do, and it guided me all the way up to Orgentulkus Stupa, which is where my teacher's stupa is right up here. So what's that, like 10 miles? A 10-mile journey with a coyote. At some point, because I was driving so slowly, somebody honked their horn. The coyote jumped and just stayed in front of the car. So that continued to happen several times when I came back over the years, that I would come back and it would have all these kind of all these signifiers of how I could find back to the seed and so on. And a year ago or so, I found it again for the first time in many years, and it was clear that was now I no longer needed to look for that place. Yeah. So it had kind of rounded itself off.
You received what you needed to receive.
Yes. But the coyotes kept showing up. Remember, every time I came to your house?
Even it guided you to my home.
It guided me to your home. And every time I came to your house for a couple of years, and I came a couple of times a year, I would get out the car and the coyotes would start howling. And since it's a shared totem for both of us, we've also had several encounters where two coyotes show up and look at us, and it's been pretty.
Yeah, been great.
Yeah. So anyway,
and of course,
that was
has that
a little extra.
Has that wonderful, humorous current that goes with the coyote connection.
Yeah.
Not over yet.
Nope.
Priya, how about you? Any questions? Or we have with us a wonderful woman named Priya, and Brad is here too, doing the filming, doing a great job.
Thank you.
And you just finished your first sacred passage.
I did, yeah. I did finish my first sacred passage, and it was absolutely amazing. And
you're coming in from Europe originally, right?
yes, I'm half French, half German.
German
yes.
and French.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And for me, the sacred passage was like a reset of the nervous system, completely. See? And for me, it's always the hummingbirds that come, like this one. For you, it's the coyotes. And one of the biggest realizations that I had was that we are all part of the one field. And that was really something that I had never really experienced, just being part of a holistic system. That this is, I knew that in the mind, but then the experience of it, sitting at the river and suddenly hearing the voice saying, everything is love, everything is love, just give it all to me, everything is love, just be love. And that flow has been with me through the whole passage. And I had so many encounters with hummingbirds. I had so many moments where I felt just the energy of everything around me, be it the tree, be it the stones, be it whatever it was, just that I am a complete part of this, that there is no accidents in the universe, that everything is just a field that is guiding us, a force, that everything is already written. I told you that was my experience, that everything is already done and we're just remembering that we are one with everything. And so just being on the land here for 7 days, fasting and experiencing the energy, my energy and the energy of the land, and then seeing everything as interconnected as one energy. That has been an incredible experience for me.
And you've been involved with many traditions
I have been involved with...
and going quite deep. So how was this different?
I was getting out of the mind and into just the heart and the beingness.
Yeah. Direct experience.
It is the direct experience, yeah. It was, the mind was really going rampant in the beginning, and maybe you know that from the passage, like coming from the busy life, and then suddenly there is the stillness, and the stillness comes with an experience of, for me, came with an experience of oneness, the one field, just love. Everything is just love. And I had really this heart-opening experience with
That's beautiful.
the river.
Yep.
And the, yeah.
I remember we had a long talk about just resting in love before you went out.
Yeah. And the relaxation. So that really was, and you mentioned that in the beginning, the relaxation from the busyness. And I still do the meditation, but really just the meditation to go inward and to really relax and feel. And I love, feeling the earth here when I'm here. So, yeah. Must have been
some during the retreat about how our culture's become very good at emphasizing nowness, presencing, and almost to the extreme, so that if you're only in focusing on more and more nowness and presence, you can actually, I noticed this when I first studied Zen. I ran into yogis and monks who are striving desperately to abide in the pure now. And because it was not happening for them, a kind of inner desperation arose, and you could see it in their eyes. Kind of a final grasping. And of course the paradox was they'd never received any instruction in letting go. And so I like to think that the way of nature emphasizes the process of letting go, relaxation, and surrender into the here and now. And through that comes a natural opening, which is easy. Easy to say, but not so easy to get to.
Very supported here.
Yeah. It's one of the great things here, and both of your sharings that I got into this, is beginning to learn about the voices of nature. To begin to listen to what a tree has to say, or what is the sentience of a rock. Or, computers, cell phones, a lot of them are made up of silica. Brad and I recently went to a conference out in California where they were looking into AI, the future of AI, but not a single person there had spent any time looking into the sentience of a quartz,
Yeah.
of a quartz crystal. And now we have AI and all of these computer systems and phones and so on, powered by silica, quartz. And we never have actually sat down to connect to quartz in a pure form. So we're learning how to listen to the language of the different beings of nature. And be they a fly or a flamingo, there's a potential to really hear a unique language and sharing. We think that we only have that with domesticated animals, but actually it's potential in all of life. Most living things are far more telepathic than we are. We've lost that capacity. So part of the process of the way of nature is de-domestication and rewilding in a natural way. And when that happens, we begin to refine our perceptions and senses. Everybody in this passage you just did said, wow, my senses are so refined, so clear, so sharp, so tuned into stuff I didn't even pay attention to before. And now it's central to my experience.
And I think, actually, John, E.O. Wilson, who passed a couple of years ago, one of the great, really great scientists of
Very
the
good
20th,
biologist, one of the great ones.
very, very good biologist, the ant guy of the 20th century, a huge figure, who also wrote, the social conquest of Earth and put out the half-Earth theory and all of that. Lovely scientist. The only natural scientist, at least, who won the Pulitzer Prize twice, which is pretty cool. He passed a couple of years ago. He wrote, I believe maybe it was in the Social Conquest of Earth, he wrote that our senses had now deteriorated to a degree because we didn't use them any longer, that he was worried about the future of humanity from that perspective. And for a while, I was really, really kind of concerned about that until, when kind of really looking at the plasticity of our brains and then being in the trainings with you, it became pretty clear to me that it's not that they've deteriorated, it's just that we've lost the ability to connect with those senses because we don't use them.
We haven't cultivated them.
We have no idea how to use it properly, but it's still, because our brains are as plastic as they are, it's still actually possible to cultivate that.
It's all there. The potential
It's all
is
there. And I just wish before he had passed that he would have learned that as well. I think that would have probably given him some peace at heart. Yeah.
I'm sure.
But at least I've been. It's very clear to me that it is actually possible, even for a few days. Even because I don't have people out on the lands in the same way, but even after a few days of cultivating, people say that they wake up in a different way to their senses. Yeah.
Well, nature is everywhere. This happens to be a very potent place to reawaken it, but it happens every place. But learning to be able to receive clear messages from nature is a wonderful opening. And when I was young, I did a lot of expeditions, which he's recounting now in this book. So I'd look for a blank spot on the map, and then find a few crazy people to go with me. And then I'd go in for a month or several months or 3 months or longer. And one of the things, especially in Alaska, I had a lot of work in northern Canada and Alaska, I had been trained by my grandfather in tracking skills. And when you track, you learn how to see the signs in the track. How long has it been since that being passed? How much of the edges of the track dried up and begun to fall into the track? And if you know the weather patterns of that area, the past rainfall patterns, and so on and so forth, you can know within a matter of minutes or at least hours how long it's been since that animal left that track in the ground. And then when you go deeper with tracking, you begin to see, that track, it had a lift-off that was super contracted. And you begin to see, that animal was under some stress. It was beginning to have to move more quickly out of the neighborhood. Maybe something was coming in and tracking it, following it, and was trying to escape that situation. And then you begin to tune in through the track to the animal itself. When you get really good at tracking, you achieve a point which many of the Bushmen in Africa accomplish, where you begin to have a dialogue with the animal that you're tracking. And in the indigenous passageways, and I've been lucky to live with probably 50 different major tribal cultures in my lifetime. They all had this capacity through tracking to listen to the language of the being that is being tracked. And so when you reach the point of where you're going to make the kill, your final instruction is to be absolutely still and quiet and not chase or even continue tracking. Your main responsibility is to be absolutely quiet, tranquil, and sit in one place in communion with that species, with that animal being. And then invite the being, if it's ready to release its life, to move on to another existence. You wait until that animal steps forward. Then your job is to have an absolutely clean kill and to use every part of the gift of the animal to a prayer for it, a prayer of thanksgiving for the gift of its spiritual gift of its body. And so when you eat the animal, you are honoring the gift that it made. That's part of how you actually have a meal. And of course, I'm not discriminating against plant eaters. Plants have similar consciousness. So it's very important with them too, to establish a connection with the plant that you're about to eat or utilize in some way and receive the permission of that plant to work with it, utilize it. Very, very important. We've lost all of that in modern culture. We have these gigantic agricultural farms that are all pesticided and herbicided. Huge machines going out. No direct human relationship with the hoe and the sickle. When I was raised, we would hand hoe our fields. We would hand plant all our plants. We never used a plow. We took a stick, we pointed in, we placed the stick into the earth, so heaven, she came in through the stick, imbued the hole, lifted the hole up, lifted the big stick up, and saw Mother's energy, Earth's energy coming into the hole. And then one of the young kids would put a seed of corn, usually corn and bean. So the corn grew up, received the nitrogen fixing capacity of the bean, and that corn plant provided the support for the corn stalk. So it was a collaborative deal. And then usually with the Three Sisters type of planting, there'd be a gourd nearby, or some type of, maybe a pumpkin. So this kind of relationship to our food and to the vibrancy of all living things through tracking and hunting and gathering, which is our original way of connecting. One of the ways of connecting to nature most powerfully has been lost. And even human hunters now when they go out rarely have this experience. I remember in West Virginia, I have a farm out there, and some of the hunters still hunted and practiced much of what I just described. They would sit, open their hearts, make a prayer for the animal that was ready to release its life, to come forward, and then their job was to clean kill. Other hunters would band together and chase the animals through the forest with the help of dogs until they drove them into a place where you could take your shot. Of course, the animal's stressed. There's no respect. There's no honoring of the spirit of that animal. It's just a brutal chase and kill. And we've moved from that kind of thing to being completely caught up in a taker mentality, which just goes out. We feel as humans we have the right as the supreme species on the planet to take any life at will. So we've grossified, I call it the grossification of perception. We've grossified our capacities to honor all of life in every possible way. And now we have the challenge of AI coming. So I'd like to think that the way of nature provides a de-domestication rewilding process that brings back these inherent capacities to really hear the voice of nature, hear what the birds are saying when they sing, to hear the song of the stones through the field that they carry, to begin to honor the voices of the hummingbirds, the bears, the, what was it for you?
Snake.
Snakes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in the way of nature, the source connection part is done by, it's an old Taoist practice called turning the light around. And in Dzogchen, you have the pointing out process. In Taoism, one of the main techniques is to simply refine your perceptions. So you begin to follow them back into your inner nature. The truth of that helps you begin to see your obscurations, which stand in the way of connection to the senses. So then the challenge is to release the obscurations and the shadows. And we spent 4 years doing shadow work recently. And the graduates from that, Brad was one of them, was a remarkable training, but it took some time. Then when the obscurations and the shadows are somewhat clarified, then the capacity to connect through the sensorial fields of sight and sound and taste and smell and touch, balance and movement, and energy work become very clear. Then you have the capacity to, instead of going out into the light for the sound externally, you turn everything around. You follow light, sound, touch, smell, taste, experience of movement, the experience of the energy body. You follow it back into the deepest place where it arises internally. And that reveals the face of Source. It's very simple. So at that point, it has a very common relationship to things like Dzogchen or non-dual Advaita Vedanta or the path of the Christian mystics, especially those that were in the Gnostic side of Christianity. And so you discover this common ground. So you'd have to fight about who's got the best religion. You come back to the original one, which is part of our birthright as hominids moving about the planet in the old days. And when you understand that communication, that everything is communicating, the coevolutionary process becomes much more apparent. That through that communication, plants and animals and humans began to evolve collaboratively together as a synergistically collaborative enterprise. And out of that synergy came things like plants and flowers that began to heal us, we use as medicine. Have you noticed how few plant medicines have negative side effects? Some do, but the majority have very few side effects, unlike modern medicines. There's a reason for that. It's the coevolutionary process. The whole system is coevolutionarily evolving into a synergistically collaborative enterprise. Result. Every species went through that, including us. Isn't that cool? Well, anything you'd like to share? I was really curious how it was for your daughter when she had her month-long solo. By the way, we got together once a week, so I had the gift, as I do with all these long programs, of weekly sitting down with those folks. And what an amazing experience that is, to tune in and connect, to feel going deeper and deeper and deeper into the solitude and space. It's fantastic. What a gift. So your daughter, you speak about her. She was pretty young then.
Yeah.
18, 19?
No, a little older.
20?
Must have been 22 or 23. And of course, Clara Elvira holds the shares with you, having been hit by lightning multiple times. And
Really?
yeah, you put her on the lightning shaman side for that reason. The site with the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a transformational process. I feel I can't really share. It's private, or it should be, people should share their own experiences.
Yeah.
But it has certainly been completely transformational for both of my kids doing this.
Well, I'll mention one last thing. So I brought these 3 books out. And one of the things that Michael has been doing is looking at some of the early history of the environmental movement as a system. So this book, The Future Environments, my thought here was to bring the various disciplines that thought they had a pretty good answer for the emergent issues that were affecting nature, pollution, air and water pollution, pesticide use, and of course we had Silent Spring, which is a classic, which really pointed out a lot of the how poisons flow through ecosystems, and everything within that system gets affected. Before that, there was a man named Fairfield Osborne who wrote a book called Our Plundered Planet, and that pointed out how a lot of the major impacts were beginning to affect all of life on the planet on a planetary scale. So in a sense, Fairfield Osborne and Rachel Carson's books were really pioneering books that laid the groundwork for a systems perspective.
Yeah.
In many ways. I thought in this book we would bring together, we got a grant, and my thought was if we bring together the different disciplines like governance, economics, biology, regional planning, and a whole range of different aspects of human culture that felt they had a responsibility to understand what was happening to nature and natural systems and give their perspective on how they would heal some of these problems. So we asked each one to provide a chapter. I worked with them for about a year or two prior to the gathering that this book represents. And each chapter put forth their view of how they were going to heal this issue. We spent a week together. In those days we had more time in culture. And after the week, and each person having a day to half a day to present what they would do, it became very clear by the end of the gathering, the conference. This was called the Future Environments Conference. It became very clear no one discipline had the answer.
Yeah.
So what we needed was a whole systemic approach to these issues. And a guy named Lewis Mumford summarized this. So kind of an elder in our culture. So this book laid the groundwork for, instead of a natural resource perspective of air, water, soil, agriculture, all these different things were different natural resources, separate. That we begin to, and we also were in the habit of just taking, not giving back in a reciprocal way. So this laid the groundwork for having a reciprocal relationship to nature, and also seeing that nature was multifaceted in so many different facets, and many of which we had no clue of, because we had such a human-centric perspective. Those were cut off. So out of this came a support for the word environment, which was a very early word to describe a whole systems approach, or an ecosystemic approach. And then the invitation was to go and show what was happening to nature. Because in the mid-60s, we still didn't have much of a view of that. So this is over 1,000 pages. Kind of challenging carrying around. But it holds together 200 case studies of what was happening to nature. And scientific reports on this amazing, devastating process that was happening on a planetary scale. We put this little design on the cover of the rising moon being a rising skull, which was kind of the view we had in the mid-60s or the late 60s. This finally got published in 72. Became a database for the big conference the UN held on the environment in Stockholm in 72. Then, so it built on, here's what's happening to those natural systems with a good, strong scientific perspective. Then this book was followed up, published a year later in 73, and this one laid the foundation of, here are some of the ecological, ecosystemic principles that if we're going to have a better relationship with nature, we need to learn these principles, have them in our education, and incorporate them into those that are having a direct impact on the earth, be it agricultural, through grazing, or the management of water systems, whatever it might be as a natural system. Here are some of the core principles of how to work skillfully with those systems. And of course, this is a work in progress. We're still learning how to do that better through science. And so these three books help to lay a foundation for a whole system perspective, which we now call the environmental science and the environmental movement, which provided a public support system to power up getting things passed like the Environmental Policy Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, among a few. And earlier on, the Wilderness Act was passed, which was an amazing act that said we need to set aside areas on the planet where human impact is minimal. A guy named Howard Sennheiser did an amazing job in publicizing that simple concept, and that laid the foundation for what we've done here, Sacred Land Sanctuary. He wanted there to be places where you could go and meet nature in a relatively undisturbed way. So no motorized vehicles are allowed. These areas are largely left to themselves to be as they want to be, and where we don't interfere very much. If we go in, we try to leave no trace. Minimal impact. Very similar in some ways. It was almost like going into the Louvre or the great cathedral and honoring the sacredness of some of the few remaining natural places left on the planet. So I honor the wilderness system, which I think the U.S. is the only country in the world that has done that, as another step in the direction of providing a spiritual foundation for deep connection. And this sanctuary here is meant to be an example of what I hope every county in America can do, and abroad, where there's a place to go where you can make that deep connection to the big family of all living things. And utilizing some of the kinds of practices Native peoples have always had, and which we now have in the way of nature, to reconnect, go deep, and have that receive the insight about how to be better partners with the rest of life. It's really simple.
It's a beautiful vision.
So I wanted to share that before we finished up.
Yeah.
Any last?
No, I'm just very glad to have been here this afternoon.
Thanks for sharing.
With you, Mette and Priya and Brad.
Good to have Priya and Brad here too.
Yeah.
Brad has done, by the way, quite a few solos, a lot of passages, plus a 28-day and a 44-day immersion.
44. Wow.
Gone very deep. Yes, sir. Sorry I interrupted.
No, I am content. Nothing more to say. Yeah.
Well, it's been a lot of fun working with this guy in the book. He and John McGough do a chapter based on some old stories I shared we recorded years ago, 5 years ago. And then he's been transcribing them, and then with John, and then coming up with a draft, sending it my way, and then I'm sure I'm a big pain in the ass for it.
No, we get to correct mistakes. We get to make them accurate, and then the refinements and the expansions, and So then we go back and we revise and refine, and we have a high-level editor in the UK that we're working with, and we're going to have a first draft October 1st, final draft February 1st, and talking to various publishers, and then the movement and the fellowship.
What's the draft title of the book going to be?
Well, the working title is Lightning Shaman, John P. Milton and the Crisis of Earth. But, as the theme comes into focus, as the sacred passage comes into more focus, who knows, maybe some other... Lightning Shaman is...
Not bad.
Good, it's not bad. It's pretty dramatic. And it's to the point.
There were a class of shamans in Tibet. The Tibetan form of Buddhism is called Vajrayana.
Right.
And one of the terms, Vajra translates as thunderbolt.
Right.
Or adamantine or diamond-like. So this is the version of Buddhism, which is the diamond-like cutting through, or the lightning bolt cutting through kind of Buddhism. And there was a class of spiritual practitioners who had been struck by lightning. The membership means you have to have been hit by lightning, killed, and brought back to life. If that had not happened, you were not part of that club.
Pretty exclusive club.
And because you were killed and then brought back later, your view of source was pretty good. And that eventually merged, integrated with Dzogchen and Vajrayana Buddhism. Emerged as a...
And you had to practice that a few times?
Only one major strike.
I thought you were hit like 5 times.
Well, I've had a number of other very close strikes, where the electricity reached me, yes. That's another story.